April the 14th, 2016. My name is Tanya Finchum. I'm with Oklahoma State University, and today I am in the library on campus to speak with Barbara Miller, who will be retiring July 1st of 2016 after 20-some years with the library. So thank you for talking with me today.
Okay.
Let's begin with having you tell us when and where you were born.
I was born in Chicago, Illinois, October 17th, 1947. And the story behind that was when I was just learning to talk, my parents drove to Canada. And as they passed the gate, the person at the gate leaned into the back seat and said, "Where were you born?" And I said, "Mercy Hospital." And everybody had a good time with that. But anyway, that hospital's no longer there, so I guess I'm back in the dark ages I was born.
And did you have brothers and sisters?
I had a sister and a brother, both younger than I am. My sister's passed away, and my brother is out in Pittsburgh, or northern Pennsylvania now.
And what did your parents do for a living?
My mother was a musician, but after the war, they were both Marines. Both my parents were Marines in the war, and after the war they came back to Chicago. You know, she was Italian and he was Irish, and the families did not know each other because they grew up in different neighborhoods, and so they got together with family. And my mother worked at Marshall Fields for a while, and my father was an executive with the phone company. And my mother stopped working when I was born, and she didn't really go back to work until we were older. The children were older.
Well, with that mix of a background, did she have traditional foods that she would make?
She did, and if you know, Chicago's a city of neighborhoods, and my parents actually were born a mile away from each other. They were grew up a mile away from each other. We'd go to the Italian side and have Italian food, and then we'd go to the Irish side and have Irish food. And in spring, St. Patrick's Day and St. Joseph's Day are 2 days apart. And those are the big holidays, so that was a big time where you'd go one place and then the other for the holidays. And my mother cooked spaghetti, made spaghetti sauce, but she didn't do a lot of Italian dishes. I think, although my father liked spaghetti, but I think it was more my grandparents that really hardcore Italian.
And did they speak Italian?
They did. My mother would always speak English to them, but when we'd go to their family gatherings, everybody would be speaking Italian. And so my father didn't understand it, and we didn't understand it. My mother would speak English back. So about 30 years later, she always said she could speak Italian if she had to. They went to Europe, and they went to Rome, and they got there, but their luggage didn't. And my mother opened her mouth and spoke Italian, got the whole thing straightened out in an hour and a half, and my father was just astounded. And then he said, and she hasn't spoken it since. So she could speak it. And I learned a little as an adult.
And where did you go to elementary school?
Well, for a couple of years I went in the city. And ironically, since I was born in Mercy in Mercy Hospital, we lived across from a Mercy High School in the city, and it was kind of an Irish neighborhood. And then when I was about 6 or 7, we moved to the suburbs, to Flossmoor, which is a southern suburb of Chicago. And I lived there till I was about 14, went through freshman year in high school. And then we moved to Springfield, Illinois, which was the center of the state. And I went through a couple of years of high school, and then we moved down to Alton, which is actually a suburb of St. Louis, even though it's on the Illinois side of the river. And so I lived there till I went to college.
And what year did you graduate from high school?
65.
And what was the name of the high school?
Let me think. Marquette. That was was a Catholic high school. Not a very good one at the time. In fact, it was to the point where when my brother started, my father sent him to the public high school. I think my parents were still of that generation that it was more important for the boys to get a really good education to get set for college than it was for the girls. And I was just shocked that he would send anyone away from a Catholic school. I didn't really care about it, but my sister was mad about it. He got to go to the better high school.
Well, did you have a favorite subject in high school?
I liked languages, and I always liked music, but, that was separate, piano lessons and things. And I liked history, and I probably still like those things, literature.
Well, in high school, were you making plans to go to college? I mean, was that expected? Or?
Yes, it really was. I think my parents had said to us that there will be money for you to go to college, but we expect you to work and help out, that kind of thing. And I worked a couple summers, and of course back then you didn't make very much money. Of course you still don't relatively, but I worked a couple of summers, and my parents didn't have to pay anything my freshman year because I had a National Merit Scholarship and I had money earned, and then after that they had to help out, but college was a lot cheaper then.
And where did you go, and how did you decide to go there?
Well, I don't really think, I think my father just sort of said, you need to go to the University of Illinois, that's a good place. And I was clueless, so I went there and I changed my major several times. I started out as an art major, and I had drawing and design and drafting the first year, and I had an A in drafting and a B in design and a D in drawing. So I said I probably wasn't meant to be an artist, and so I switched around, and I finally wound up after a year in anthropology, and I stayed there.
And graduated when?
69.
So the Vietnam War was
Mm-hmm.
beginning, or?
And I think my parents were really worried that we wouldn't finish, because that was, when all of these colleges were going on strike, like the law school went on strike, or the teachers would go on strike. There were all those kind of things happening on campus. And anthropology was a sort of a left-wing type department, and they were worried. And I remember thinking at the time, what happens if the department votes to stop classes? I won't be able to finish, and I thought my parents will kill me, but we got through.
Were you the first one in the family to go to college? Well, if you're the oldest, you'd be the first
in my
your
family, but my parents both have college degrees,
Okay.
and that was unusual at the time for them. They both graduated right before the war, and in fact, my dad only got through college. He had signed up for the Marines for officers training on the condition that they would let him graduate. 1941, Pearl Harbor, December, and he needed to get to June to graduate. And they agreed, but in April they called everybody up. And Loyola, he went to Loyola, they gave them all their degrees, all the men that had to be called up, and they waived their final exams. And that was what people did then to get them in. So he barely made it. My mother was actually a little older than he was, and she finished, I think she did a year of master's work too.
And hers was music oriented.
Mm-hmm. She was a pianist.
Well, did you take lessons from her or from someone else?
No, she was always very careful to give us lessons from somebody else, although she taught other kids. They would trade, because, you can't teach your own kids. They don't think mom knows anything. But I think what I got from her was more of an appreciation for piano, because she would play, and I liked her pieces. That's my favorite. Chopin and Beethoven and things that she played are still my favorites. And I like to relax with, a book and piano music at home.
Well, once you finished with your bachelor's, what did you do?
Well, I got married after my junior year, and my husband was a microbiologist, and so after we married, he was a graduate student, and I finished, and then I had a year of graduate work towards my master's in anthropology. And his professor, of course they worked in a lab, and his lab advisor moved to UC Irvine and took all his graduate students with him. And so I had to leave, but I had gotten all my classwork done towards the master's. So I had to finish the thesis. And so we moved to Irvine, and that was my first library job. I got a job in the library, and I think I finessed my way into it by the fact that I knew my way around the University of Illinois library from being in anthropology, because you probably had to use 15 of the branch libraries to get all the anthropology stuff. It was spread all over. And so I had a knowledge. Anthropology department really pushed their students to learn how to use a library, which was, that was always probably the best thing I got out of anthropology, was learning to use that library and learning how to use, we didn't have databases, but how to use the catalog and how to find things in the stacks and how to use journal articles and so on. And so when we went out there, I applied for work in the library. And so I worked, we were there 2 years, and I worked on my master's part-time, and they didn't have anthropology. That was a brand new university, so I had to get the books from Texas, because the books at Illinois, even though I was still a student at Illinois, they wouldn't loan out. The things I needed were old manuscripts and stuff, and so I got them from Texas. And about 40 years later, I actually got to that library in Texas and talked to those people. Obviously, they were different people then, but they wanted to know what I used and what my thesis was. We were excited that somebody used this material. So I finished it. I was working as a catalog assistant, and my advisor was in Peru doing research. And I knew I had gotten most of my research done, and then he came back and he said, I'm only going to be here 2 weeks. He said, you have to get that thesis turned in. So I took a week of vacation, and I wrote 8 to 5, and I revised 7 to 10. In 5 days, I finished it, and I sent it off. And I thought, well, and they accepted it. They said I'd only made 2 mistakes. I messed up hierarchical and hierarchical. I was in a discussion, and I couldn't believe that they accepted it. But I think the training I had, in which kids don't get now, in writing papers as an undergraduate, graduate at Illinois, got me in the groove that when you have 3 or 4 papers due every semester, you plan your life around those papers, and you know that I can get this paper done in 4 days, and you get out there, do the research, write it, and revise it, and send it in. And I think that training really helped me get that in.
And those were the days where you used a typewriter.
Oh, yeah. You had to type everything. And, but I think I was a pretty good typist from that. That probably helped me in cataloging, I guess.
I recall, was this the university where they were filming Planet of the Apes, or was that later?
That's right.
That's this one.
Irvine was where they filmed Planet of the Apes. Should I tell the funny story?
Yes.
We had, that was the early 70s, and everybody in the library was in, hot pants and boots that came up to, your hip, and embroidered, and crazy clothes and everything. And we had, the people had come to film Planet of the Apes because the library was very modern, and they had one side that was a wall of windows, and outside they had these very modern looking architecture, steps and things, and so they wanted to use that. And it was, I think it was the second movie, and people would come in to use the restrooms and stuff in full ape makeup. And, of course, everybody was plastered to the windows for the first week or 2, and then after that, everybody got bored, because if you've ever watched them make a movie, it mostly is standing around, and waiting for the cues and stuff. So everybody got, bored with it and wasn't paying attention. So then this man came to interview for an associate. He was, I think it was head of technical services, I can't remember. Anyway, and he was from somewhere in the Midwest, and he came, and he was, what got him the most flabbergasted were the hot pants and the crazy clothes. Of course, we were in the catalog department. We didn't see the public, and we could wear anything we wanted. And he said, boy, I guess when it comes to clothing around here, anything goes. And right when he said it, a guy came in full makeup, walked up, the secretary said, where's the restroom? And she just pointed, and nobody even looked up. And we all just stood there, and he waited, and he waited. It was really funny. And he finally just said, okay. But that was really funny. So, but they finished the movie, and I've seen it since. I hadn't seen it for a long time. My kids weren't impressed when I said I was there. So.
Well, those 2 years in working in the library, did that spur you to go on to get a library degree, or at that point it wasn't?
At that point, I was still in the anthropology mode, and I was also taking violin. I was taking violin lessons. I had a violin of my uncle's, and I had taken piano from students at Illinois, and then I had acquired this violin, and I'd always wanted to take lessons. So I was doing that. So it was a question of either pursuing music or pursuing anthropology, and the job was just to bring in a paycheck. And then when we moved to Berkeley, where my husband was doing a postdoc, ironically, my violin teacher moved up there to go to graduate school. So I was still taking that, and I was taking voice lessons in the city, and I had thought about trying to see if I could do the PhD there at Berkeley. And I almost did, but I just didn't think I'd have enough time because Bob was only going to be there for 2 years, and that's just not enough time to get a doctorate, even to get the coursework done. Mm-hmm. And I often wondered if my life would have been different, if I finished. And so I worked again 2 years there in acquisitions and cataloging, and because I'd had the experience from Irvine, so I was able to get a job pretty easily. And but in the course of that job, I had worked in acquisitions for about 6 months, and then they switched me to cataloging because they knew I'd been in cataloging before, and I had noticed that, and of course that was pre-computers, people would do certain searches in acquisitions, and then when the books would get to cataloging, they'd repeat everything. And I mentioned that to the head of cataloging. I said, we're duplicating efforts here. There ought to be a way we can, and he said, you need to go down and talk to the head of technical services. Well, and later it turned out the reason he told me to do that was because the head of acquisitions and the head of cataloging were kind of in adversarial relations, and he figured it'd be better to go up to the top and come down. Well, and that's where I met Joe Rosenthal, who became a mentor of mine. And I told him about this, and I said, maybe there's a way we can improve workflow. And so when he found out we were going to move to Tennessee, that's where Bob got a job, he gave my name. He knew the librarian down there, the director, and he said, you need to contact him because I told him, and he'll find you a job down there. And so at that point, it was still just getting a library job. So we moved down there, and I was still singing. I had stopped the violin, but I was still taking voice. And so I had an audition with the voice professor down there, Ed Zambara, and I did get a job as head of the non-print microfilms. Basically, they called it non-print then, and it was kind of a strange situation. They had me as a non-professional as head of the microforms in the main library, which was all the research material. And they had a librarian in charge of the microfilms in the undergraduate library, which was mostly just journals that were on microfilm. It seemed like that was a contradiction. But so then when I was at Tennessee, after I'd been there a while, I decided maybe I should go to library school because they didn't have what amounted to much of an anthropology department, and since I had all this experience, I thought maybe I should do that.
And was it in Temple Court? Do you remember if your classes were in Temple Court at UT?
That sounds familiar.
UT?
It was a specific building.
Close to the student union?
Yeah, kind of.
Temple
I think
Court.
that's probably what it was. Yeah, I forgot because you were there too.
So when did you start at UT? Or finish?
Well, we moved there in 74 because I was 70 to 72 at Irvine and then 72 to 74 in Berkeley. Then we moved there in 74, and that's when I started working, but I don't think I started working on my library degree for a year or two. A lot of people there were a lot of library science students, of course, that worked in the library, but there were also a lot of staff that were getting library degrees because it was right there and it was easy to do. And I worked on it for a couple of years.
What year did you graduate from there?
Yeah, I think it was 78 because my daughter was born, Kate was born in 77. And I was taking 2 classes at a time while I was working because you could get, tuition kickbacks there. Mm-hmm. But after Kate was born, I took 1. And I didn't have too much left. And she was born in 77. And I think that she was like 1 or so when I graduated, a little over a year old.
Where was the library then? It's not the new one. Well, it's not the current one, is it? Was it?
They were building a new library, or they were going to build a new library when I left. So this was the old library, but I don't know what the old library is now. Okay. It might still be a library.
It is special collections, I think.
It's the whole thing. Wow,
a good part of it, or it was in '90. I don't know about now.
Well, we had to go down. The microfilm, which they would never do now, was down in the basement. And when you went down those, it was stone steps with brick walls, and it was like going down in a castle or something. And you go down, you could feel the temperature drop and get clammier as you walked down the stairs. You literally could. But when I came, the first thing I had to do, they hired me for that job, was they were moving all the microfilm from wherever it was to this place. This was now going to be the microfilm room. And it was pretty good size, but you had to double shelve the film. And so, and of course, it's the same way now. Nothing improves, with time. That the shelves, the book trucks weren't the same width as the shelves, and so you had to make sure everything stayed in order, which of course it never was with the double shelving. And that was the first thing I did. The first day I started, we did that for about 2 days and got it all down there. And we had the Andrew Johnson project. These were presidential papers series that people were doing, and they worked a lot with the microfilm because there were old newspapers and things like that they used for their work. And they were right next door to us down there. They had an office. There were about 6 of them.
And you liked library better than anthropology, or just?
Well, I think I just got away from it, yes. and it was more convenient to do that. And I think a lot of people get into library work that way, and especially after Kate was born, there just wasn't a easy way for me to work on a doctorate, and I think I just got away from it. But I did finish the library degree, and then.
Well, what had you planned to do with it? Going to a certain area?
Right. That was part of the problem. The fact that you could do a library master's in anthropology, but you could not do a library doctorate in cultural anthropology, which is what I was in. And I was in Latin American anthropology with a specialty in Peru. And so I would have had to go to Peru for 6 months or a year to do research, and that just wasn't convenient, particularly after I had a child. And it just looked like it was just going to be too difficult to try to do. And so that's why I thought the library work would be easier.
Well, when you were going through the library program, were you focusing on archives or management or anything in particular?
Back then, I don't think we really focused. Okay. I don't remember there being a focus. I took classes that I was interested in. There were some that were more interesting than others. The management class, the instructor was just dreadful, but we read a lot, and everybody just sort of figured in there, well, we can read and learn information because we're not going to get it from this. And he was a nice guy, but he just didn't know how to teach. But I took that, and you had to take, basics, cataloging, and I took children's lit.
In general reference.
Yeah, reference work, and you had a comprehensive exam back then, I think. And all these kids were complaining about it, and I said, you would not complain about this if you'd had to write a thesis, which I had to do for my other masters. And it was Nothing, and everybody said, you worked in libraries for 6, 7 years. By now, they said, you're not going to have any trouble with comprehensive exams, and I didn't, it was written. It was all written. And I had really not thought about it, what type of library. I didn't think I could work in special collections. Now, that was an interesting thing because at the time, and maybe it's gotten easier, you really had to know Latin and a lot of languages, and I had smatterings of languages. I had a lot of French and Spanish and some Italian and Dutch and things like that. But you really had to know a lot to look at some of the old manuscripts. And Tennessee had a lot of old things, well, they had 17th century things. They had a lot of old manuscripts, and they didn't just collect for the Southeast. They collected a lot of European manuscripts and things like that. And I just didn't think I'd be qualified to do that. Plus, I was thinking in terms of I'm probably going to be here because my husband has a job here, and I'm not thinking that I'm going to be moving, so I have to look and see what jobs would be open here. And so I think that's why I just waited to see what came open, and the first thing that came open was a reference job, and so that's what I interviewed for.
And from UT Knoxville, you went where?
We were there 7 years, something like that.
Oh, a long time.
No, even more than that. About 10 years, I guess. No, that's not right either. Let me think. Yeah, we moved there in 74, and we moved in 80. So 6 years, I guess. And then Bob, my husband, took a job at Loyola in Chicago, so we were going back to Chicago area. And at that time, I stopped work. I mean, I was pregnant with my second child, and I decided I was just going to not work for a while until I got the kids older because I would have had to pay daycare and so on. Kate was about 3.5. And so, but I had worked about 1.5 years, I think, in reference. And it was general. It was pretty general. And there were a lot of documents there, although a lot of the documents were down in the microform room. There was a lot of microform stuff, and when I was down there, the head of reference used to take his librarians down there for me to give them a lecture on what we had down there so they'd know to help people. So that helped me when I went to general reference. I was able to learn that. But then I just kind of stopped cold turkey for 10 years. The whole time we were in Illinois, I stopped and partially raised 4 kids in suburban Chicago.
Well, that brings us up to, when did you come to Stillwater?
1991. And I started, I wasn't working when we moved in, but when my youngest child was in 1st grade, and I had another one in 4th, so I had 2 at Sanger grade school. And I remember when we went, the librarian would say that, any volunteers, please come and help. So I volunteered. I said, I am a librarian, card-carrying librarian, so I could help you with some things. Well, she just was so excited. She had me doing things that she knew I could do that somebody who hadn't had any training couldn't do. And I worked there, 2 or 3 afternoons a week. And then the person that was the library assistant, they wanted her to do another job 2 days a week. So I wound up being a permanent part-time employee for a year or 2. And by that time, my oldest daughter was college age, and we'd sort of said, I have to go back to work when they start college to cover the bills. And so I wrote a letter to Dr. Johnson, Ed Johnson, and I told him what my background was, and I said I haven't worked in libraries for, by that time it had been about 13 years or something like that. I said, except for working in the school library. So I'd picked up some computer literacy from working in the school library. Although at Tennessee, they had started doing Medline searches when I left. So I had some experience with that. But that was it. And so I told him I've worked in public service and technical service. I've worked with government documents. But I haven't worked in an academic setting for about 11 years. And I gave him my education. And he called Sheila Johnson and said, you want to call this person and see if they can help out. And she called and interviewed me over the phone and brought John and Connie up John Phillips and Connie Kirby and said, do you think you could use her as a visiting faculty member? And of course, everybody was glad to get another live body. And I think they already had Nancy, I can't remember her last name. Nancy was already working as an adjunct. And so they hired me. And then for government documents. And I remembered a lot of it. Of course, you remember, parts of it. But I think they were most interested in the fact that I had some government documents, but I'd also had a lot of cataloging. And it was going to be part cataloging. And you remember back then they would make sure you understood that this job had a lot of cataloging. And I said, that's fine. I don't mind. I enjoy cataloging as long as I know I can't press a button and erase the whole catalog accidentally on the computer. I'm fine. And so that's how I came here.
Do you remember your first day?
Yeah, actually it was kind of a weird first day because at the same time I came, Elaine was interviewing for another job in the department for a permanent position. And they had already done all that search and when I came. And so I was kind of there, but they just gave me a few things to read because they were running around with Elaine interviewing. And so that was kind of funny. So for about a day or two I had that going on.
Elaine, what was her last name? I've heard it mentioned, but I can't think of it.
I just can't think of her last name.
Yeah, we can look it up.
We'll look it up. And then she started a few weeks, I don't know, maybe a month later, but by that time I had enough. Connie sat down with me and started showing me how the computer, cataloging worked. And Sheila had suggested maybe you should, when John and Connie were there, Sheila interviewing, and Sheila had suggested that would you be willing to go down to the library school at OU and take a cataloging class just to update you. And I said, I really don't mind, but I said, I can tell you what happens in cataloging classes. They give you rules and then you get a job and they tell you why they don't follow this, that, or the next rule because of the peculiarities of the library. And so I said, I don't know that it would be really helpful to the job. And Connie looked at me and she said, you're absolutely right. It wouldn't help at all. I mean, with the amount of things you have. So I kind of plunged in.
And that was the Jackson system, too. It was different.
Well, yeah, the Jackson system. But, I didn't really classify in California because they already had LC numbers. So we didn't classify. I mean, the librarians probably did for original cataloging, but of course we didn't do original cataloging. And they did at Irvine. And they did it here too in the main cataloging. Every librarian had a full-time staff person, and they would supervise that full-time staff. And for a while it was just an open pool, but after a year they split everybody up by subject because they figured that way you could get real familiar with a certain subject area and you could move faster in your cataloging. And so I had social sciences. I almost picked music, and they let the staff people pick who they wanted to work for. They figured that was the best way to do it, and so I picked social sciences because that was my background. I felt that I would probably be better off. And ironically, then I did get government information because there was a lot of political science stuff and so on. So I had a lot of that type of cataloging before, so that helped.
Was GovDoc still on 5 at that point, or were you somewhere else?
Yes, they were already up there, but they had recently moved back up there, I think. You probably remember we had those T-shirts that had all the books that listed all the moves that they zigzagged up and down. Mm-hmm. And so I just started right in cataloging, and then John would take me out on the reference desk and talk about some things and get started that way. And then Elaine started, and so then once he had Elaine there, then he was just giving us classes, in different things and talking about things because he could do 2 at a time. And Elaine's background, I think, was English lit. And so she had a different background. So she probably had more makeup to do than I did from the subject areas.
And John knows his government documents, doesn't he?
He knows the documents.
Pretty good teacher.
And, we learned a little bit about everything. And I probably felt Well, of course, you always feel more comfortable cataloging because you're putting things in slots and you're matching things. But when you're out on the reference desk, it's just every question's from another planet for a while until you learn all the different agencies. So that made it more difficult.
So you were a visiting professor for a couple of years?
Yeah, about, I think from, well, I started 2 days after my birthday, October 19th. And that was 95. And the new job started almost 2 years later. It was July of 97.
Okay.
So I had about 20 months.
They created a position, or?
No,
Someone
somebody, I can't remember how, it might have been a vacant position when I was visiting, but it took them that long to get organized. They tend to take a lot of time here to get organized to open a position. And there were, at the time, there were a couple of positions open because Brian had interviewed, and who else? Julia, I think, for the patents. Patents, which was not in the department at the time, it was over at the CI, that West Watkins building. And that job was open also, although everybody was ostensibly interviewing for this one position in docs. But they ended up hiring Brian and I don't remember how that worked. And then Julia for the patents. I think that happened all at once.
And Ed Johnson was still dean at that point.
He was still dean.
And Sheila's role, was she an associate dean? Or
She was an associate dean.
Okay.
Head of public services. That's why he turned that over. When I sent him that letter, he turned it over to Sheila because he figured it was probably a public service position, you know, so yeah, Sheila was doing a lot of going to conferences, I think, for Ed because he didn't have time. It seems to me I remember that vaguely.
Well, looking back over 15 to 20 years, some changes that's happened here?
Well, not too long after I started, first of all, they had taught me, part of my job was instruction. So they had me doing a couple of the bibliographic instruction classes. And once John figured out that I could teach a class, you know, he went to a couple. He said, well, you're fine, you know, and we'll give you on this. And they had the notice system, which was, in our minds now, very primitive, you know, system. And they were switching to Voyager pretty quickly. And so we got training for that. And I felt that Voyager was pretty straightforward compared to Notice. It was easier. And it looked cleaner. It just was a better system. So we had the training for that. In the course of somewhere along in those lines, they needed somebody else to teach the credit class. That was Peggy Wolf, and then it was David Oberhelman had taken it over. And so John said, well, you could probably do that. So I said, well, okay, I'll volunteer for that. So then I was teaching that class, and I taught that for several years, a 1-hour credit class. And so that took up a lot of time with grading and, you know, things like that. And then once they got a few more people, I dropped it and they started the online version. And then more kids were taking the online version. And so you'd have a class of just 6 or 7 or 8 kids instead of 15 or 20 kids. And so they didn't need as many people. And so I stopped that. But that probably aimed my research areas, you know, into instruction more. And I did it with the government documents angle, instruction for government documents, and I did some work with OLA, Oklahoma Library Association, and ALA, American Library Association, and the Depository Library Council, which ran the program, the depository program, I did several presentations and things on how I would teach government documents, because we also had bibliographic instruction for documents classes, as you know. So that's probably where I put my research areas and my outreach and things, was in how to teach documents.
And information literacy was.
And, yeah, information literacy, sort of information literacy for government documents, but also for that credit class.
Mhm.
So I probably lean more towards instruction than anything else at that point.
And you were always very good with when a patron would come up with a question, very patient and as thorough as you could be.
Well, John taught us that, you know, because if we weren't, then he'd come up and take over. We had to be. But I think that was okay. I mean, you learn very quickly that what a student asks is not really what they want. You know, they'll ask a question, but that's not remotely what they need, and so you have to spend some time. And we worked nights then too, so we were on our own at night, you know, for 4 hours. So we had to know the collection pretty well, because we didn't have anybody to call. Nobody in main reference knew the answers, so we had to find it.
And we had a reference desk up on 5.
Mm-hmm.
No longer.
No longer. Although we have patrons come in, but we don't get as many, and not really sure why. I know that people find things online. I know that a lot of government information is online, but if you're doing historical work, that's when you need the paper collection, because it's just not all online anymore, or still, I guess I should say, it's still not all online. And we get questions every week that are, you know, will take you a few hours to try to dig something up, information they need. We had one this week that wanted testimonials from what was the name of that ship? Tuscania, which was a sister ship of the Lusitania that was also sunk by the Germans in World War I. And they had found some testimonials, and they wanted to find more. So we had to dig around with that. Well, that took a few hours. And we had one, a week ago. They called me, I think it was Monday. I spent better part of the day on this one. Curriculum committee in Oklahoma that had lists of textbooks back in the 30s. And they needed it for some project they were working on. And this woman called me. A graduate student had borrowed what we had from Loyola in Chicago, but she was in library school at Northwestern or something. I don't know how that worked out, but I got a call from Northwestern from a historian who was asking me about this, because the things that they sent them for our materials from interlibrary loan, they were afraid they weren't complete, or there were things missing, and they needed to have it stand up in court for whatever they were doing. And so we worked on that for a long time, because the set was kind of not very well put together. The holdings were missing things, and so that kind of thing comes up. So we could say we don't get a lot of questions, but when we get the questions, they're always longer, and you have to. And we have a couple of professors. Dr. Henderson's class in public policy, they come in, and you're going to spend a few hours with them. And the legal classes, there's 2 or 3 different faculty that do legal classes and bring them up, and we introduce ourselves, and they both get the instruction from their professors now. They give them the instruction, but they have us meet them and show them rules in and out of the department, and then we're there for questions.
Well, in your time period too, the GovDocs has gone from paper to electronic.
Well, we have a huge backlog that's not cataloged. And when I started work 20 years ago, John told me it's only 20% cataloged. When he was still saying that when he retired a year ago, it's 20% cataloged. I said, wait a minute, I've done thousands and thousands of titles. We have to have made some progress. But I know there's over 1 million titles that are probably not cataloged. And a few years back, they moved a lot of those to the annex to make room for the math lab. And the problem was they weren't cataloged. So when Connie retired a year and a half ago, she started working half-time. She came back under that university program where you could come back half-time and work. And she spent half her time at the annex and half her time in our department, and she's getting the annex cataloged. Now we have Michelle Cycle, who's theoretically she's half-time documents, but in reality it's more because she brings cataloging over to the annex with her in the afternoon where she's in with acquisitions, but paper acquisitions doesn't have as much work anymore. So she brings cataloging with her, and so she's probably close to full-time cataloger, and now Misty Long is over there full-time. So we have a lot of people over there that can get that material catalog, which is very important because we can look in a shelf list, but we spend a lot of time every day. There's piles of books that go back to the annex and come back, back and forth that people have borrowed, or the courier service going back and forth, and that takes a lot of our time. And so we're trying to catch up. I think it was nice of them to give us those people because that'll make a big difference. But I find because we're having to coordinate all this, and Connie, we depend on Connie a lot. I depend on her for suggestions on what do you think would be, based on what you know what's left, because she knows more than I do because I would do things as I was handed them. What do you think the agencies that would be better for beginning catalogers or copy catalogers to handle? Because we also have half time of another Tanya who's in Maine, who works under Ellen Ross, and Connie found some things that she thought would be suitable for Tanya to do, and showed Ellen how to do it. And so she's handling, this is in the Maine collection, a lot of areas, and Connie, of course, is doing Maine. She's been doing Navy. And initially we were just going to start at the A's and move forward, and we said, that's not going to work, because then you don't know who's done what, and you have flags that get misplaced. And so now I think what we're doing is we have a list of agencies online and sub-agencies, and we're just going to mark them off as somebody finishes a sub-agency or whatever it is, and we're going to go to things that we think need to be cataloged. Connie identified national parks, of course, especially since it's the 100th anniversary this year. We try to look for things like that there's going to be a need for those because people are looking at anniversaries. I was originally going to do agriculture. I pulled some things. But what I've really been doing the last, we had about 25 or 30 book boxes from the state library that they had given us that they were weeding, that were duplicates and stuff. And we had to go through all those boxes and find out if we had the materials. It was mostly Department of Education, State Department. Find out if we had it. Find out if, yes, we have it, but theirs is a better copy, and we're going to switch those. Well, we did that for over a year. I mean, it took a long time to go through that, and had students helping us. And then after that, I started working on piles that John had left around the department, that he was going to get to this, and he is working part-time in maps. So he's been going through things that were piles left in the map department. Not by him, because he wasn't down there at that point. But it turns out that Michelle is also a maps cataloger, and that's a specific kind of cataloger. You have to have experience. So she's splitting her time between doing some of these piles of maps, and it was a lot of Oklahoma Geological Survey stuff. And then I did some, and then I did these other piles that were left. And a lot of them were things that you don't write down any statistics because you're comparing, or you're saying, okay, we're going to substitute this for the other one and change the barcodes, but you don't write down that you did any new items. So my statistics look ridiculous every month. 25 added copies, and that's all I did. Well, it's not all I did. So, but that's kind of, we feel that we've finally gotten caught up with all the piles. We don't have any more piles. I think I have 8 rolls of microfilm sitting on my truck that I have to do. That's it. And then now I can go back and do start with an agency and go forward. And so the thing is, it's important for me to do it as it's important for Connie, because we know the problems. And at the same time, since we started this new software, Alma, everybody had to learn a new cataloging software, which is not intuitive. It's quite different than Voyager. And it's more tedious to get something cataloged. It seems to be, and I keep waiting for it to become second nature and I can get through it. But because the stuff that was left uncatalogued is not as straightforward as the other stuff that we'd already done, it makes it more difficult. And I'll pull a truck and it'll take a week or two to go through that truck because I'm pulling things that, well, this was not cataloged, it has a barcode, but it was just given provisional cataloging, and now we have to go look for catalog copy, and if there's no copy, we have to give it to Michelle for original, and, you know, well, this was put together as a series, but it's not really a series, somebody goofed, you know, and we have to separate it, and so it's a lot of unknotting of problems, and it doesn't go real fast. So I'm hoping, my goal is one of my goals was to get rid of all the piles, the extra things that were left over. And then the next thing was to at least start getting through an agency so I can get a handle for what's there and know who to give it to. And, and the other thing that we have to start doing is there's a 583 field in the MARC record, in the cataloging formatting, that is for describing condition of materials that maybe you're going to either rebind or digitize or something of that effect. And you can list the condition. And the Government Publishing Office wants to identify these materials because now they have gotten permission from the Joint Committee on Printing to allow regionals to get rid of some of their paper materials if there is a good electronic copy, and if there are at least a certain number of copies extant across the country for preservation. So it's important for GPO to know, yes, Oklahoma State has this, but we looked at the 583 field and it's falling apart, or there's maps in there that are going to disintegrate when you open them, or it's very faded and it's on onion skin paper and you can read both the print on one side and on the other. You can't digitize this and make it legible. They need to know that, and that way we would be more likely to get permission to get rid of ours and let somebody who has a better copy keep it. So we're starting that. So that's, and we're just going to move forward, you know, but since we're doing all this retrospective cataloging, it's a good time to start.
Well, with your end date inside, are there certain things you want to get done before June 30th?
That's kind of where I am. And some days, you know, there's a lot of other stuff going on, and there's some AOA stuff I'm trying to finish. I'm still editing Oklahoma Librarian for OLA. And we're trying to find a successor because I only have one more issue, so that's going on. I'm not going to go to ALA this summer. I had my last one, but they're doing a kind of like an oral history, but it's not as extensive. Fireside chat, they call them, with it started out about 6 people that were retiring that have been around for quite a while to talk about where Government Documents Roundtable is, where we've been, where we need to go, and, you know, wisdom of the ages kind of thing. And now that our Superintendent of Documents is also retiring, Mary Alice Bass, she's on there too. So we're trying to organize that, and that's coming up next month.
Are they going to record it?
Oh yeah, I'm sure they're going to record it. Because people can't all listen. And the fireside chats they have recorded and made available.
Well, you've been very active in ALA and Godord and OLA. I mean, very active. Any highlights come to mind?
I was chair for a year of ALA Godord. I think that was very instructive. I decided to run for chair after I had served on ALA Council for 4 years. I felt that would be a good use of my time. We had quite a few government documents people on council at the time, and they'd been on there a while, and so we knew how to get things done on council. And what council shows you is how you get things done in your round table or division, because people would throw out a resolution, but they hadn't taken it by other people, and they didn't know how to write it, they didn't know how to, get it passed, and so on. And you knew who the mover and shaker committees were on the ALA committee level. And so with that knowledge, I felt that would be really helpful to go to GODORT. I enjoyed working on the state and local task force in GODORT, because every state does things differently. Their governments are all different, but they give you ideas when you go there and network on, well, we could try this in our state, or, here's something we tried that didn't work, that kind of thing. You learn what doesn't work, which is probably more important than what works, so you avoid pitfalls. And I really enjoyed that. When I first started at GODORT, they would have agencies come and talk, and I couldn't keep up. There were too many people. They knew all this stuff inside out, and I didn't. And so it's a really high growth record. But I think that when I was chair, I was able to contribute better, because that was one of the things I focused on, was liaising with other parts of ALA, because many hands make short work of things, and the Federal Library have a round table. The MAPS librarians have a round table. They all work really closely with GODORT. The business librarians are always interested in it. RUSA, the reference, they love knowing what's going on. And then there's a committee on legislation for big ALA, and all these groups need to work together. This is one of the problems with ALA being a voice to the government or whoever you want, is because people have so many different opinions, they can't speak as one voice. And I think we really need to work more on that. So that's what I worked for. And I think a lot of people agree, but there are still some people that want to get their way of doing things staying. And I said, that wisdom does not come from having to have your own way. Wisdom comes from listening to different points of view, and listening and real appreciating different points of view. I think that's what you have to say, appreciating. And we teach it. We teach it when we teach critical thinking and information literacy, that you have to appreciate bias and you have to appreciate different points of view. And yet then when push comes to shove, we're not practicing it. And I've tried to, especially in my later years, really listen to how things are going to affect somebody else. And that works in the library too. What's their issue and what's our issue.
Well, we've traveling it to and from ALA can be a challenge sometimes too.
We've had that, haven't we? You and I had that. We had, 2 extra nights in Washington, D.C. because of weather. That was quite interesting.
And that was summertime too, wasn't
it? It was bad storms, I think, and not in D.C., but my favorite part of that is that the last night, the third day we were going to fly out, they told us that we probably weren't going to fly out because they didn't have a crew. Remember that? And we said, how could you not have a crew if nobody's left this airport for 3 days? How could you not have a crew? That was quite interesting. And I had another one that we spent 2 nights in Houston, Helen Clements and I. We had deliberately chosen a southern way back from a midwinter meeting. And that was not a good idea. Because if you've been in northern airports, they get them cleaned and very fast. But in Houston, they closed the airport because they were predicting that it might snow. Never did, but they still didn't open the airport for 2 days. So we spent one night in a flea bag hotel and another night with one of our colleagues who was at Rice. And she had said, if you guys get stuck, call me. You come out to my place. So we called her the next day, and we had a great day visiting her and got back. But yeah, travel has its ups and downs. As long as I have a book with me, I don't care.
Well, it's nice to have connections across the country too. I mean, and you get that from being active in
I think
AOA.
you do. You know where people are. And I always think that's helpful too when people call, like they called from Chicago, that one time. And I said, well, you're at Northwestern. I said, here's 3 names. I know these 3 people. I said, they can help you up there. Now, they couldn't help her with the Oklahoma stuff. And I have called, I had a student one time that was trying to get information on, it had to do with baseball stadiums. And I'm trying to think what they call those, an impact plan for how it was going to, environmental impact. He wanted environmental impact statements for ballparks. I don't know how he ever got that topic. But I called up to Chicago because it was the 100th anniversary of Wrigley Field, and I knew they would be doing stuff, so I got a hold of 2 or 3 colleagues up there, and they had all kinds of stuff for this guy. City council meetings for when it was built, 100 years ago, and all that kind of stuff. And that really helps when you can call and you know someone. So that's very helpful.
And you win points for the library image.
Yeah, that's right.
Librarian image.
Yeah. I never did hear back from that guy. If he got, he said, well, I'll let you know. He said, but I know this is going to be a great report because I got all this information. And this was for some very basic class. It was like freshman comp or something. It wasn't that, kids pick topics and they have no idea how complex what their resources are going to have to be, but sounds like a simple statement to them. So it's kind of funny.
Well, hooking people up with the information is one of the perks of being a librarian too. I mean, you feel good when you've accomplished that.
You do, and I never know, how far should I go? Like I was telling this historian, I gave her the name of Jeff Willite at OU and Steve Ballou at the State Library for those curriculum guides and lists of textbooks. And I said, I don't know what their holdings are, but you could ask them. They may be able to fill in, but I also said you can call the State Department of Education and see if they have a collection. There is an archive at the State Library, but I don't think it's necessary for me to call because she was going to fly down here. And I said, don't fly down here. You have a lot of information. You have very specific information on titles. You call first because that's a lot of money to fly down here, before you know what's what. And she wanted to know how far it was from the airport in Oklahoma City to here. And I said, well, an hour and 20 minutes to each airport. But I said, if you wait till August, there'll be an airport here. But I guess it won't go to Oklahoma City, though. You have to go to Dallas first. So anyway, but that's helpful, I think, too.
Well, we've talked about ALA, a little bit OLA, and then within the library, you've also served on various committees and had important roles.
I have. I've done promotion and tenure. I did that on I had you up for something on promotion and tenure. Promotion, I think. Those committees were interesting, but again, you have to look outward, and I felt that a lot of librarians don't look outward to the university, and there's been a lot of movement under the previous provost to equalize promotion and tenure procedures throughout all the colleges, and the library's a college. And I worked on faculty committee, and I know that the professors are given dossiers for things that the provost would like another set of eyes to look at when there's been a dispute and it's gone up to the provost. And then I've listened to other people in our RPT say, well, the provost isn't going to look at this. And I said, the heck they aren't. They're going to look at every one. And I know because of being on faculty committee. And so I think it's very helpful. And again, it was helpful when we found out in faculty council and things, changes in the program that were going to affect us and that have really significantly affected, like the college level review committee is completely different now. It's elected. And so that made a big difference. But trying to explain that to people, trying to get them to understand we're part of a larger group here if we're doing promotion and tenure. It's not just the library, it's the whole university. Is kind of hard. But I enjoy that. I think it's interesting to work on. I enjoy writing and editing things, so I guess I enjoy that. But
that's where Oklahoma Librarian comes in, I guess.
Yeah,
some
I think
extent.
I enjoy editing, and I still edit my kids' papers. You know, my son just sent me the abstract for his dissertation and said it has to be down to 350 words, and I've got 4 1/4. And I said, I can get it down. And but I enjoy that kind of work.
Well, and you also played a role in the noon concert.
We did, and I think that's very valuable. The music department is so grateful for that. And Michael, Michael Kim, who used to be a cataloger here, he had the idea for that.
Oh.
And he said, I think we should do this. And I said, well, we need to go to the dean. And so we went to the dean, and she had some other ideas too, and I started it. But then I had already had a promotion to full professor, and David Oberhelman hadn't. And I said, why don't you take this over? Because he had the music department as his liaison anyway. And I said, it's one more thing you can put on there. And he was glad to do it. So he's taken it over and done it since. But it gives the undergraduates and graduate students another venue to perform, particularly if they're planning on going to a national contest or something, or if they have juries coming up that they have to perform for juries, or they have a recital coming up. It's another venue to perform to get that experience, because they don't really have many chances in the department. And I'm still on the Friends of Music board here. That was kind of an outgrowth of that. I chaired it for 3 or 4 years. And now we get a new, finally, performing arts center. Somebody just gave us $25 million, so I'm looking forward to that, but I hope I'll still be in Stillwater. It's probably take 3 years to build it, but at least it's coming. But I feel that we've helped them, particularly their brass groups, trombones and horns and saxophones, which I guess is wind instrument. They repeatedly win national performance contests. They've done another one, the trumpets this year, pulled in with 2 individual winners and a group winner, the overall ensemble. And that just never happened before. So the music department here is really growing, and I think that's helpful to them because they can perform here.
And it gets them into the library and...
Yeah, in theory it gets them into the library. Well, they do come in here for sheet music.
Well, people come in to hear them.
Yes, people do
into the
come in to
library.
hear them. Or for the free cookies. I'm never sure which one it is.
Both. And then you did Soul of the People?
We did. That was a grant that David Oberhelman and I had. That was to discuss primary resources for the Dust Bowl. And we did it. We had several venues. We used the Sherrar Museum here, and we used the public library, and we had a lot of programming and a lot of speakers for various things connected with the Dust Bowl. They were marvelous. Some of them were oral histories that we had, collected and heard. And we did. We talked about slave interviews, from the Depression, and there were a lot of people that was very well attended. I think there was just a lot of people that came to those. They were very good. And then we did it in conjunction with the Let's Talk About series of books, of reading at the public library, which is a program, National Endowment for the Humanities, that puts that on. And they have people read books on a certain theme, and then they have discussions and programming on it. And so we worked it out around that. And it was quite interesting. And there weren't a lot of grants that had been given in the library at that time. And so that we had a high learning curve for things to put in, and certain boilerplate things that you can transfer in that you have to fill out. And we suggested at the time, we were hoping to get a grants person, and now we finally have a grants person in the library, so I'm very excited that finally happened. But that was and then we gave a lot of presentations on it too, so that was helpful. And now we have a World War I series. David and I that's going on for 5 years, and we have 2 or 3 speakers a semester on different topics of how World War I affected life in general. And in fact, last night I saw one that I think this needs to go on there. It's a documentary on German cinema during the Weimar Republic from World War I, basically from the cabinet of Dr. Caligari in 1919 all the way to Hitler till the Third Reich came in. And I was just astounded at how they commented on society. And these were mostly silent films, but they were just so well done as an art form. And it was a new means of expression, because music and art at the time also reacted to the World War, the First World War. And that would be just a wonderful thing to show here. I think people would be people that didn't understand anything about film, or particularly silent film, would appreciate it. So that would be another topic. We've done piano music, and I think we should do an art, I'm sure we'll do an art lecture. I think that would be important too. So.
Always thinking ahead, Barbara.
Well, yeah, and David said, you have to come back and do this. Well, this one, David has an endowed chair, so he wanted to use the money to bring in speakers. That was, and I had brought it up to John earlier, and it just kind of didn't get picked up. And then I told David about it, and so then he came back and said, all right, now I've got this money, let's just do it. So we're doing it. We haven't brought in Oklahoma State collections yet, because that would be next year, when the U.S. entered the war, be the 100th anniversary will be 2017. And so we have things lined up that are, although they've talked about the U.S., but most of the talks have been about Europe. And I think Mary Jane Ward is going to come talk. She's doing a book now on World War I and locals in World War I. And I think if she could bring it local to Payne County like that, that's why she wanted those testimonies from that ship, because there were Payne County soldiers on that ship. So these kind of things, this will highlight special collections and documents and everything. We want to get some programming done, so I guess I should work on that before I go.
Or come back part-time.
Yeah, well, I thought about it, but I really don't think, I think with the budget the way it is, I don't think they wouldn't be able to bring back people part-time now. And I mean, they're trying to make it so that people don't lose any key positions across the university, but I think those half-time positions are the ones that are going to go, because they're not, I mean, although they're really necessary for us, like we really could really have benefited from John and Connie coming back half-time, but I think from the university point of view, they're not as essential as some other things. So I have a feeling that wouldn't happen. But I guess I have enough to do with all my other.
Well, we should probably ask, what are your plans after you retire? Do you have any set already?
Well, I have my niece's wedding in Tahoe in July. I have to get to that. That's my first thing that I do when I retire. I have a new grandchild coming in 2 weeks, and I hope it's 2 weeks, because I need to get out there to help her out. My youngest son they want me to go to Germany and visit there, because my daughter-in-law is from Germany. But I don't imagine they'll go before a while with the new baby. They'll probably wait several months. At some point I'll do that. And I can help Kate, my daughter, out in Tulsa, because her daughter needs babysitters often, because she has a boss who requires evenings and weekends and things. And so she still needs maybe 3 more years, and then she'll be old enough that she can just drag her into the office and say, do your homework here, you know. So that's part of it. And I think the travel, and I would like to do that. And I don't see myself leaving Stillwater for a period of time. I don't know where my older son's going to wind up. I don't know, you know, and they would like me to move to Denver, Corey, my younger son, and they would think that would be great. And so they're just kind of, I'm going to just try to relax into it, I think.
You'll still be active in some aspect of libraries, public library maybe?
I am the chair of the trustees board. I've done that for about 4 years, and before that I was on the Friends board, and I'm going to keep that up for a while. And I'm still on the Friends of Music board, so I will keep that up. I don't know if they're going to put me in charge of the fall dinner again. And we do have a new music department head coming, so there'll be an education curve. We'll have to meet with him several times. So I have those things that I'm already doing, plus the house, keep up on the house.
Sure.
There are things I want to get done to the house that it requires me to be home, while you have somebody working on it. So I put that all aside till I retire.
There was a time when you had a goal of reading 100 books a year. Do you still do that?
I read a lot of books. I think that I've often gotten past 90, but I hardly ever get to 100. This year I've spent less because I have so many needlework projects. I had a niece born, or a great niece. I had to finish a baby blanket, and then before that I had something else. Oh, a Christmas stocking. I do needlepoint Christmas stockings. I had to do that for my grandson. Well, now I've got another grandson coming, but in between I had my nephew's little girl, and they wanted a Christmas stocking. So I have a huge list of projects. I just finished a baby blanket for the new bank. Actually, I have to sew it together, but I finished it for the new baby, and then I've got to start Christmas stockings, and I have a growth chart that I'm doing, and so that takes away from reading time, but I still devote a lot of time to reading. I don't think I'll ever give that up, and I have music too. I'd like to spend more time with the piano. Gee, I just can't even imagine a life where I don't have to go to work and I don't have kids at home and I can do these things,
You're going to be busy anyway.
I know.
At least for the first year.
I know.
Well, looking back, if you had to describe what would you like your legacy, what do people see as your legacy within the library?
I don't know what people will see. I know that there are librarians in RLS that say, what are we going to do when you leave? Because we're down to 2 librarians, and Suzanne has so much on her plate because she still does patents and she still does, all this other stuff. She will have to take over Dr. Henderson's classes, and she'll be the only person left that knows legal. That's it. And they depend on us to do the legal research, and there's not a lot, but there's a significant amount. So I think they'll miss that. And I think that several of them have said, if you guys aren't there, we depend on you to do that work. So I think they will appreciate that. And I'm hoping they'll appreciate that I volunteer. And while I don't always have people that appreciate things I do, or they don't get along with me, or they don't like the way I work, I hope they'll say that I try to do things with the library in mind, what I think will help the library. I took 2 interim department head positions in the last year, and it wasn't on my plate because I knew I had to get stuff done in docs, but I felt it was important for the library. Mm-hmm. And I feel that I gave to the library because it gave me a perspective from that point of view, and there were things I saw that could be fixed as we were reorganizing the library that I think it was helpful. And so that's probably what I really want to push, is saying we're all in this together in this big period of change, but think about the other person's point of view. Don't just think about your department, because we know we're drowning here with not enough people, but we've gotten some people back, and every other department is the same way, and people don't realize that. So I want everybody to work together, I think, and move forward and try to see the other point of view. And I also hope that they'll think I did enough work on the university level, Women's Faculty Council, things like that. I worked hard for those scholarship and the research awards. I hope they'll continue that work and feel that that's important, because I do think that's important. And I think that making the library faculty recognized as university faculty is really important to keep us interacting with other faculty, particularly the public service librarians. So I hope that they'll say that I work towards that and want that to continue.
You're a champion for libraries all the way around.
Well, I
always have been.
I have been, and I appreciate electronics, but I still think that there are people that come in every day that give me reasons why they have to have the paper copy, and they're legitimate reasons that we just haven't gotten that far yet in computer copies of certain kinds of materials, and particularly government materials, as an example, manuscript collections and things like that. There's still a need for that, and there's still a huge need for personnel for processing in the library. It's not just our library, but we have to remember that we need live bodies to move this forward. The workflow has changed, but there's still a need for that paper material to move through. So I hope that they keep that in their mind.
Well, there's also the personal human interaction level too that you've always been very good at. I mean, you can't have a library without that.
No, you can't. And I think that most of the people that work in the library are pretty good at that. There's a few that, it's hard to get on with, but most of the people you can work on a one-to-one level with, and they're very helpful. Mm-hmm. And I'm always amazed when there's new people in big departments like access services or something that I haven't met just because we don't interact, and try to get to know them.
Well, in 2011, you were honorary mentioned for Library Faculty Outstanding Award. So I'm not sure that's the way that's phrased.
Yeah.
But,
that was nice. That was very nice.
So you were recognized by for your efforts, and we were applauded.
No, I
for that.
appreciated it. And they gave us Michelle Cycle actually wrote 3 memorial resolutions. I guess you call them memorial for retirees, and she had one for myself, and there were 3 Barbaras. It was kind of funny for that, and that was really nice. So I saved that
for OLA.
For OLA, yeah. So they're very. I would say that more than the library, the professional institutions are really cognizant of institutional memory, and that's why AOA is doing those talks, and that's why OLA wanted that, memory. They know that these people are leaving, and they want that encyclopedic memory to be preserved. And you've done oral histories on at ALA and things, and we have those down. We lost in ALA. We lost Larry Romans this year. I know you did one with him, and his ability to get along with people and know when you've lost a battle, so let's move on, or is it not worth it to win your point if it's going to mean that we have to meet for another 6 weeks and we can't move forward with this idea. He was so good at that. And I think when I talk at the ALA, that program we're doing, I think that's what I'm going to bring up. And I think that's the most important thing. And sometimes I worry about the library. They feel they're reaching out, but it's not being reached the right way. But maybe it's our fault. Maybe we have a chip on our shoulder. If the administration wants to do something one way, we want to do it the other, but we feel that they're not listening. And so you try to get along as much as you can, but you're hoping that everybody's listening to everybody else. Anyway, that's...
Oh, you've been a good team player. Yeah.
Oh, well, thanks. I hope so.
And my mentor, you're welcome to be.
Well, I always appreciated reading when you would do an annual review of yourself, and I would do one. And we did basically the same things, but you organized it totally different than I did, and I felt that was really valuable for me to read that. It gave me ideas, and that's why I kept pushing to every new librarian, please read the other A&Ds of other librarians. Even if you're not in the same department, you can learn things from that on how to organize and everything, and a lot of people still don't do it. And I think that was it's very eye-opening to read.
Cumulative reviews should be encouraged to read others too.
Yes.
Too.
Yes.
I've been told anyway.
Yes, but that was, I think those are important. I still feel that we need to work on RPT. I still think that and we've had a lot of department heads retire, and so there's a lot of new people in, and they're learning on the job. But I think that there's a disconnect when a new person comes. They obviously have their job assignment, but they should be able to talk to their department head and say, for you to reach tenure, you have these options. What road do you want to take? And then if you take that road, you're going to get tenure if you do A, B, and C. Period. That's in your discussion, in your A&Ds, so that when you get to the point where you're up for reappointment or whatever, the committee reads it and they have no problem with it. Because it's been my experience that, particularly from working on faculty committee and other things like this, that people will read a dossier, and even if it's not your college, yes, this is tenurable, or no, it's not. And everybody will be in agreement, because an average academic will recognize tenurable dossiers. And I don't think we're there yet. I've had so many times where they say, well, just write down what you want and we'll see. It depends on who's on the committee. It shouldn't be that way. It should not be that way. And I'm hoping that we can restructure. I would love to see that restructured, as we move forward.
We'll have to keep you posted.
Yes, keep me posted.
Well, we'll close with having you tell us one or two highlights. Can you think, if you...
You mean from here or
yeah, from here? Anything that just sticks out as a cherished memory?
I remember one of the most exciting things was with you. The day I had to go through my divorce, you called me and said that the provost promoted you. And I was so excited for that. That just made my day. It was such a horrible day. But that was because it was right. And I just felt that, I get so tired of some of these promotion and tenure things that you just don't feel went well, and you don't have any control over moving it. And that really justified it for me. That I just felt so good about that. And sometimes those things happen, I was excited when I got elected to ALA Council. I was very excited because I felt I could move forward with Government Documents Roundtable at that point, but I needed to get on a higher level and work, and I really enjoyed that time of getting along with other people. So that was kind of a highlight. And I think the year that I was chair of Godort,
ALA Godort.
ALA Godort. We have our receptions, our award receptions in June, and they had really done it up that year. They did it at Northwestern, and I got up to just thank everybody for being there and thank everybody for the year that they helped, and everybody gave me a huge ovation, and I just couldn't believe it. That was really nice. And so it meant that they appreciated what I'd done. And I think that was very helpful. That was very helpful for me. I felt, well, the work I did was important. So you want to feel that the work you do is important. And I don't necessarily feel that I have to be thanked for it. I just it's more of the fact that they did that, so I know they felt it was important. And that's what you want to feel, that if you work hard on something that it is important, it's going to make a difference. And I think you want to make a difference, and I think that's the most important thing.
Well, I think you've made a difference in a lot of people's lives here in the
thank
library.
You. I appreciate
Certainly
it.
mine.
Well, thank you. But I appreciate your work. I remember when you decided you wanted to do that oral history, and I said, go talk to the dean, see what they'll do. They'll give you money to go to that oral history. I was glad that you did, because I think that really opened up.
I miss GovDocs too, though.
Yeah, yeah.
And was never going to be as good as John, no matter how hard I tried.
No, but on the other hand, He worked with the research and the reference, but he didn't want to do, say, presentations. That wasn't what and you know, when you have to splinter your work, it just takes time. You can only do so much.
Plus, he had grown with the collection. I think that
Oh,
was
yeah.
a huge advantage for
It certainly was.
to grow.
It certainly was.
Mhm.
And he didn't do cataloging. You know, we were doing it maybe a quarter of our time was reference, and that made it harder to get everything done. And I felt I learned as much by cataloging different things as I did by trying to study them on my own, because you're looking at the pieces and you see how that agency works. So
Government documents was a good fit
mm-hmm.
from Anthropology.
It was, and it was a huge, as I say, a huge growth curve. And a lot of times I just felt like it was knowing what's going on with the federal government. You know, you'd hear about some person or this or that happened, and I just didn't know. And it's kind of after the fact, but I felt that it was important when I did after 9/11, when I did a paper first. I think I did it for state and local, but I might have done it for the federal task force. We were talking about the disappearing of all the information because they were just taking down stuff from the federal websites and they were worried about terrorists. And I did a study on it, and I worked with several websites and free information websites, and it was about a 30-page document of all these websites that have been closed and libraries that have been closed and different things, and how, you know, this was like 6 months later, they hadn't been reopened, and the problem with open access to government information. And the greatest thing about that was that really helped me learn all the players in Washington. Who were the players, who were the key agencies, and that in turn helped my job. So that, you know, those kind of things, and if you could just get students to know, boy, if you write a paper, that's how you learn. Mm-hmm. You write a paper, and I hope that I think with the freshman research push now, mm-hmm. finally, the kids are being forced to do that. And we noticed it with Women's Faculty Council scholarship applications. The undergraduate research has grown tremendously, and it's more professional. There were some there that would have been in the top 10 even if we pushed them into the same group with graduate students. Yeah. It is improving here, and I think I'm hoping we're part of it, but I think that whole undergraduate push is important. So
you mentioned 9/11. Do you remember where you were? I remember where I was.
Mm-hmm.
We were having a Library of Congress.
That's right.
Speaker over in the business building.
That's right.
And her site went down.
Her site went down, and the most amazing thing was she had everything in a can, and she had all kinds of things with moving pictures and things like that online, not just websites, because she was working with American Memory, and she had it all in a can. And I thought, will I ever get to that point? I didn't think I'd ever make it. But I think that was a learning skill for everybody, and it helped the Government Documents Roundtable and all the government documents librarians, because it put them in the spotlight. They had to highlight things. People would come in asking for this or that or the next thing, and you met people from agencies on what they were trying to do. It was really a spark.
Kind of a shift in the road, wasn't it?
Yeah. Well, I hope that this, as we continue this World War I, and of course December is the 75th anniversary of Pearl Harbor, and I was thinking about, of course I won't be here, but I was thinking that we should push for that, but we just don't have anybody left, and Suzanne can't do everything. I mean, she's the only librarian left, I mean, except for the catalogers, and she just can't do everything, and it makes it really tough. So I hope that we can keep that in the forefront. I hope and we are now the only regional in Oklahoma.
That's a big change.
And we are trying to look at the materials that ODL, Oklahoma, the state library, is getting rid of. We have finished all the Oklahoma cataloging for Heidi Trust in case they need any of it. And we're looking at duplicates and trying to keep the collections small, trying not to add to paper collections unless it's absolutely necessary. But as a regional, that's going to put more onus on us. That's more selectives that report to us. And I just really think that Suzanne is not going to be able to handle it. And one staff member left, even though Gwen does a lot. It's just, it's overwhelming to get all that done. And I know at one time they said they would replace me, but I think that was before the problem with the budget is so bad, you know, and they're not being able to really hire a lot of people right now. But I would hope that maybe down the line they could do that, because it's just, you know, if you look at all the people that work in special collections, we should have at least that many people.
We should. Mm-hmm.
So I'm hoping that they will, I don't think people have realized how much time it takes to, well, they know in general how much time it takes to run a department. But when I was made interim head, they said, well, it'll just take half of your time, and then half in docs. But I was reporting to a different associate dean. I all of a sudden had to go to library leadership meetings. We had 4 candidates coming in, and I was automatically on that. And I had so many more meetings, and I had to keep meetings up for other things I was doing for docs. And I bet I didn't have more than 10% of my time left for docs, trying to do those, both of them. And I had weeks where I had 25 hours out of the week I was gone. I mean, at meetings or something or other. And I know that administrators have that all the time, but you still got to get everything else done. So I worry about the department, and I think it's so important, the materials we have there. It's so important to the history of the U.S., and it's not online. It's just not there. And it's not going to be online for a long time, a lot of the small agency things. And it's not usable online. The Federal Register, we have it in fiche. We have some only in fiche, some in paper. And they're digitizing that to go online all the way back this year. That was a GPO project. Well, that's great. But you can't search easily by topic online. If you have a citation, you can go to it and get it online. But if you want to see the Department of Education hit this particular rule, you know, in the Federal Register, it's just very difficult to do that. And unless they change the way, you know, put more metadata in for keyword searching or something, it's just not working. So we need the paper. And that's a typical thing that people use in a couple of the classes we teach. So.
I think you're going to have to take back your retirement. You can't leave, Barbara.
Well, you know, it's a question of you leave and then things don't get done, but people don't notice what things don't get done. I mean, like administration. All right, they don't realize that there were things that were getting done or services that we can't offer. And that's kind of an invisible entry. And so I would hope that that's one of the things Suzanne and I should do, is put a bullet point thing on here. You know, like I was saying that I'm supposed to be a half-time cataloger, but there's hardly any cataloging that's physically getting done because of all these other side duties, which are sort of cataloging also. Well, Suzanne's going to have to do that. So what is she going to give up? You know, she's not available either. Anyway.
Been a good career, huh?
I think so. I feel that I gave as much as I could. And, you know, I think I really enjoyed working for the university. I really enjoyed, you know, getting on the committees and working on those things and sometimes bringing things back. But I don't think that as many people are into the university as opposed to into library politics. And I think they need to be, because I don't know, for example, I know Cynthia is on some committees. I know she's on a committee for research with the Vice President for Research. I found that out inadvertently. I know that Mary's on some committees, but I don't know what they are. And we don't know, if I find something out in a faculty council meeting or something like that and I bring it back, I don't know if somebody already has that information. And I think, but it's because there aren't enough people, faculty in the library that are pursuing that. You know, here's some more information that's going to affect us. And I think it's important for us to know that. So I wish that we could take faculty meetings, and we've talked about it in the past, but at a faculty meeting, I think we should hear about all the committee work that everybody does, including the dean and including the associate deans, because they're all on different committees. So I think that would be a good way to go. And I'm more interested in it than, say, an average person, but I think more people need to be interested in the university as a whole, and it would be very helpful to the library.
I agree.
Good. Well, are you on a committee right now?
I am.
Good, good. So that's what's...
Two, actually.
Oh, that's good. And I've passed on committees to new librarians. I've
Yes,
done
you
that.
have. You
You
did
know,
very
people
good
say,
there.
excuse me, people say, can you be on this committee? And I said, no. The last year and a half, I've just said, I can't do another committee. I'm already on XYZ. But I said, here's some people that need to get on committees.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be good. And we've gotten more people on committees that way. And they need to know that whoever the president of faculty council is doesn't necessarily know all the people in the library. Or if it's a university committee, the president will ask the chair of faculty council to recommend somebody. And a lot of times the president says, well, I don't want that person, or I don't want that person. But they don't know everybody. So they have to have somebody to call to say, can you recommend a librarian to work on this? And I've done that. So we need to get that connection going, I think. And David can do that right now. He's on council, our counselor, so he can do that. But I think that's important. And I'm so pleased that he's sending out summaries of what happened at faculty council, which I was after counselors to do all the time. So.
More information is good.
Yes, and then getting
sharing
everybody
is
to
good.
read it.
Sharing is good.
Yes. Anyway.
I think we've covered a lot. Anything
I
else
think
you
we
want to
have.
say before we close?
No, I appreciate it. I appreciate your department. And I know you have trouble, oral history has trouble getting reference librarians to remember to suggest oral histories to people, just like they forget
GovDocs.
GovDocs and special collections. And I think that's our push that we have to do to get out there, because we're not liaisons, you know, to departments. So we have to make ourselves known in other ways.
Well, I am very thankful my path crossed yours,
I am grateful that my path crossed yours.
and we're two UTK alum.
That's right. That's right.
Well, thank you for sharing your morning with me. It's been great.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.